Hi, I'm Dr. John Grazel, the holder of the Baha'i Chair for World Peace at the University of Maryland. And this clip is one in a series related to our project that you can visit at our website. Now, in that project and through that website, we are tracking a small set of what we call foundational principles that we think are particularly pertinent in terms of understanding what's happening now and understanding why it's happening in the way it is in terms of positive and negative things that are happening, and understanding where it's probably going, and also how we can engage most intelligently with that process. The purpose of this clip is to begin to introduce one of the four key foundational principle clusters. These are clusters of principles, the sub principles of which are what we really track. But we put them together as clusters because they are very much interrelated with each other and affect each other and react with each other. They're not totally independent. The first one, and the one that I'm going to discuss now, is what we call the sovereignty cluster. Now, sovereignty is an old concept, and in its most simple form, means basically where does ultimate power reside? Who ultimately has the authority within some particular delineated concern? Now, that delineation can be a territory delineated by borders. It can be an intellectual concept. We talk about the domains of anthropology, of economics, of physics. You can be, those are intellectual domains. We can talk about areas of authority, but what makes you the sovereign is you are the ultimate authority. What you say or what they say, if authority rests in a group, goes, and others don't challenge it, but recognize that you're the authority. Now, within that, the most prevalent concept in terms of global governance is actually that of state sovereignty. And the concept of state sovereignty has basically been the ruling understanding of the state system for about the last 300 years, after what was known as the Peace of Westphalia, and basically established state systems in which each of the authorities within the states recognize the sovereignty of the other within their own territory. You don't bother with my state, I don't bother with your state. We can go to war as states, but you can do within your state what you want. You are the sovereign. Now, as we enter a new age of greatly increased interdependency, and that whole concept of state sovereignty is being challenged. And it's being challenged in two ways. It's being challenged both in terms of understanding that concept itself and in terms of other alternative forms of sovereignty. And we can't deal with all of them, so we're going to deal with a subset. And the subset we're dealing with is the concept of state sovereignty itself. Then what we call the concept of standards of sovereignty. And this is the fundamental principle that says, wait a second, state sovereignty isn't only about what you have the right to do as the sovereign, it's about what you have the responsibility to do as the sovereign. That it's not only that you can do what you want, it's what you have to do. If you have food and your people are starving, you have to feed them. And if you don't feed them, we have the right, and the right could be the international community to come in and provide food for them, whether you like it or not. This is a doctrine in humanitarian assistance that is beginning to arise. And as we have more and more concepts of rights, more and more we're setting standards of sovereignty that put obligations on being a sovereign, not just rights. Now, in addition, we have people asserting new types of sovereignty. For instance, we have something called food sovereignty. And this is a concept being established and promulgated by various agricultural groups, particularly indigenous groups, but others as well, that are saying that food is And agriculture, particularly, is a domain. And it's been the domain of what we call agriculturalists for 7,000 years, 8,000 years. And they have the sovereignty over it. They can decide what they want to grow and how they want to grow it. And it's really being advocated in opposition to a concept of sovereignty that says, oh, states can establish laws that give intellectual property rights to corporations that do genetically modified engineering of seeds, which then they can decide whether or not they want to sell to farmers and which farmers have to pay them, as well as the idea that states have a right to make all sorts of decisions about food production independent of food producers themselves. Very interesting right. Here's another concept of sovereignty that's coming. Uh, this is a concept that is really, see, some of these are strange, called information sovereignty. And that's saying who has the power over information. Now, when you think about it, there are various ways we say people have sovereignty. Who decides what information you can collect and what you can collect? Who decides how that information is used? Does Google have sovereignty over your information? It's not just around privacy. It's about who is the ultimate authority over this information. So that's information sovereignty, and it's actually being used as a concept today. And then we have one that we follow called sovereignty of God. Now, what's interesting about sovereignty of God is one, it's an ancient concept of sovereignty, and two, it's probably the most inherently intuitive in the sense that if you believe that there is some entity, being, presence that is omnipotent, omnipresent, all-knowing, and determining what's happening, almost by definition, you recognize that as being the ultimate sovereign of the universe. And this idea of sovereignty of God has always been a very instrumental part of both religions. And then here's a very interesting one, and it gets into the whole question of conflict. I said that one of the things we've observed is that a lot of the conflict on fundamental principles is not about the principles, it's about the authority. Don't challenge my authority. Now, there was a survey done, actually, in the Middle East among Palestinians and Israelis over that very thorny issue about Jerusalem. How could you manage Jerusalem in ways that the Palestinians and the Israelis would accept? And what was interesting is, when asked, the majority of Palestinians said that they would accept it if Jerusalem was placed under the sovereignty of God. And then the majority of religious Israelis said they would accept if Jerusalem was placed under the sovereignty of God. But the majority of Israelis, who are seculars on the whole, they didn't accept it because they don't accept the concept or the authority of sovereignty of God. So here, interesting enough, what we see is we have a terrible conflict, and it has many aspects that aren't about foundational principles, territory, identity, injuries, senses of victimhood. But in terms of solutions and conflict, two of the groups that agree on the legitimacy of the authority of God are willing to accept a resolution under the sovereignty of God. But the third group, the secularists, who don't accept that, aren't willing to accept the solution. So the real battle is between who's the authority. Well, we're going to deal with these very much, but this is one of our foundational principle of local government sovereignty, and it's very interesting. It's very much in play, and unfortunately, a lot of people use it, but they don't look at it in terms of all its complexities. They don't look at it in terms of what the other party really conceives of as sovereignty. And they're not open to being really that imaginative about how we have to recast it in terms of the challenges that face us in the 21st century to achieving a world where we can govern globally in ways that benefit us all. So I welcome you. Come to our site and learn more.